And
right?
the left is now doing the same thing that Alex Jones was doing, because the left is calling this shooting fake. They say it's an
Yes,
act, it's theater. It was all staged to
it was
get
staged. Yeah.
the Republicans the advantage. So how many times do we see leftists complain about Alex Jones and his behavior with the Sandy Hook shooting? Now they're doing the same thing, and it's like I'm amazed nobody from the left has made a bad historical reference or comparison to the Nazi Reichstag fire in Germany, when the Parliament building, was burned down essentially, and it was probably the Nazis to influence the election cycle. So again, apparently the left is pretty lazy mentally, because they haven't actually made that claim. But it's just a matter of time until somebody actually tries that. So they're doing the same thing. It's always about, this is everything. We're all gonna die if we're not doing something rash and radical, because people are so overwhelmed with content these days. Nothing will work, nothing gets the views, nothing gets the clicks, except if you call somebody Hitler, if you make a comparison like that, if you say that this is the biggest threat ever. I mean, this is what Timothy McVeigh believed, before the Oklahoma City bombing. He thought the United Nations would take over America and the New World Order was going to happen, and patriots end up in concentration
Well, that's
camps.
why I call this "Do You Hear the Voices Too?" Because, and I'll just say what Norman Cohn said: there exists a subterranean world where pathological fantasies disguised as ideas are churned out by crooks and half-educated fanatics for the benefit of the ignorant and the superstitious. So, and this goes to the right too, because I was kind of frightened by the hysteria that I was seeing from Trump supporters, because hysteria gives birth to hysteria. We had Americans conditioned for decades, because of the Kennedy assassination, the way that's been discussed, to scoff at the idea of a lone shooter, and that a lone shooter would attack a president or a presidential candidate.
Well, if we look at a shooter like Thomas Crooks, we're looking for interior motivational factors, and then we're looking at direct and indirect influence on him from the outside. Now, of course, I checked again the literature on shooters. There's even a Secret Service study about this, and there's also quite a bit of research done on the so-called incel phenomenon. Now, these are very frustrated young men. All the attributes, they fit Thomas Crooks perfectly. He's exactly the same age. He was a loner, probably never had a girlfriend in his life, and he was possibly or very likely also frustrated about his economic outlook. So he was never going to really make serious money. He would never own a house. He would never become sort of an attractive man, and he would never have a fulfilling relationship. Probably hated everything. He hated his life, hated his work, hated work in general, hated America, hated the system, and just would have liked to burn it down and create a situation that causes chaos and motivates others to do something very similar. Now, this is his interior motivation. And so there's a separate category of terrorism, which is the incel terrorism phenomenon. There have been incidents in various countries of these young men, and it can happen as a separate category. These young men do not have to be associated with traditional radical ideologies such as left wing or right wing. They can do this just on their own because they think the system is unfair. Only a small number of alpha men get all the women or the most attractive women, and the incels, they're left with nothing, so they just want to bring down the system. It's a very weird category of people, but it exists, and sometimes it is tied to other political ideologies. So there's the interior motivation, and then there's these outside influences. Now, a direct outside influence would be something like this rumor that is going around. I think at this point it's nothing more than a rumor. People are saying maybe he had some electronic contacts with Iranians or some middlemen of the Iranians, because we know the Iranians are pretty mad at the U.S. and mad at Trump. So this, in theory, would be an outside influence if somebody worked with him and maybe coached him, especially coached him to not leave a digital footprint, because he barely left any digital footprint that would tell us much. But then he was also a smarter kid, and he was handy with computers, so he probably knew how to surf the web or the deep web without leaving traces. So he may have been driving around looking for unsecured or less secured Wi-Fi networks, hacked himself into these networks so he could surf the internet with somebody else's connection.
By the way, he did put a warning on the internet. I don't know if you saw that. On Steam, which is a game server.
That's not. I think that's not clear right now if that's truly him. Maybe it was him.
Yeah, they're saying that was him. He said, "My debut is on July 13th. Stay tuned." You know.
Yeah. So that would be. So this is kind of what we would think of as an external influence, and there's so many young men like him. This has become a problem of epic proportions. You have a lot of poor, young, angry white men. And so these are potential terrorists that could be recruited by state or non-state actors. But also, we look at indirect influences, indirect outside influences on the shooter Thomas Crooks. I mean, there's so much stuff going on now on, let's say, the platform TikTok with these short videos. There's so many people on there hating on the system, hating on America, and saying it's all a scam. These rich people like Trump, they get away with everything, and the average young person, they can't make money. It's not like in the 80s. It's not like in the 1990s. You can't afford anything. You will never own a house. You will always be poor, and if you're a young guy, you will never get a woman. So the system is broken. We need some sort of a revolution. That stuff has been out there for a long time now. And this is some sort of an outside indirect influence that may have happened. And all the stuff that's on the web, or almost all of it, is legal under the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, right? So there's so many campaigns that can be done by, for example, Russia and China. So many media campaigns, and you can't just pick one of these influencers and say that's illegal, because it's legal what they're saying, but there's this underlying interwoven call for a revolution, call for an uprising, and saying, hey, I'm not alone in this. There's other people out there who feel the same anger. We need to get radical because the system will never work for us.
I just want to clarify. Incel means involuntary celibate. That's correct, isn't it? So these are young guys who are never going to get a girlfriend. I remember reading about a Soviet spy manual just after World War I, how to recruit spies. And it said, look for a good-looking young man who lost a leg or an arm in the war. That was it. You know,
because they can. Yeah,
that would be the incel of that time, wouldn't it? You know, the guy whose future has been shattered, but he's still alive, and he's bitter at the system. And he can be. There was nothing mentioned about ideology. It was just they were bitter. But you know, like Branton Tarrant, who shot up the 51 Muslims, killed them in Christchurch. His explicit plan was to use guns to get the US left to clamp down on guns, so the US right would fight back, start a civil war in the United States to the benefit of Russia and China. And, you know, the mass shooter in Buffalo, the supermarket in Buffalo, the mass shooter in El Paso, the Walmart shooter there, they were both National Bolsheviks as well. They were from the same philosophy as Branton Tarrant. So you've got that, some of them have a philosophy, some of them are incels, some of them are probably blends of, but there's a lot of disaffected young men out there.
I don't understand. You thought I was advocating against freedom of speech? Because I didn't do that.
Oh, so I misunderstood you.
Yeah, no, I didn't advocate. I was saying what the laws were in the United States.
Calls for violence. Yeah.
What freedom of speech means in the United States is that Congress will make no laws abridging the freedom of speech and the press. It doesn't mean that people see, we can say whatever we want, but in America we're still responsible.
Sure.
You can be sued, and you also have criminal liability for certain kinds of speech. For example, if I come over to you and say, and let's say you're mentally retarded, and I say, why don't you drive your car over the next door neighbor's baby? I could be, if somebody overhears that and you drive over the baby, I'm liable for that speech. So it doesn't mean quite what people say it does.
But do you mean
so
that
I'm just making, I'm not saying that we should have laws against, and I'm certainly not saying we should have laws against conspiracy theories.
Okay.
I'm just pointing out, I'm just giving an objective analysis about what these things are doing, what these things are actually producing. What's that?
But are you saying that we cannot compare any politician to Hitler now?
No, I didn't. I just said that that's why, very likely, that is definitely going to put somebody in danger. If I were to say in public that you are a child molester, if I were to say that in public,
we have to prove it.
And that would get around where you live, that would put you in danger in your local community. Right. So if you can do real harm, you can cause someone to be hurt or killed by saying things about them. It's just a fact.
Yeah,
and political discourse about a very famous person who has been president is different. I mean, if you want to call him Hitler, then you're a dumbass. But that's not an incitement to hatred, according to me.
It isn't. It is an incitement to hatred. It's perfectly legal to say whatever you want. There's no law against comparing people to Hitler. Okay.
Exactly.
There's no law against it. I'm not advocating a law, but I'm saying that if you say somebody's a Hitler and he's running for president and someone shoots him, you actually are responsible in a philosophic sense in terms of objective responsibility.
Morally, you are responsible.
Morally, you're responsible. I didn't say that you should be. I didn't say that you should be put in jail for it, but I'm saying that you really are part of the cause of of someone being hurt.
I think it's perfectly clear that outside forces, especially communist forces, that they have understood that there's so much freedom of speech in America, and that's where assets can hide behind, and that this is how, especially with freedom of the press associated with it, this is how you can create a campaign, a very destructive and dangerous campaign, because you're hiding behind these rights. And I think that in American history, especially the Cold War, there was a pretty clever way of dealing with this. This is what the FBI had done, for example, because when the Black Panthers were around, this was a radical Maoist group, and they were calling for all sorts of uprisings and having a big war. And then you had the KKK groups, and then you had all these communist groups. And the FBI, they started to use the available tools to infiltrate these groups. And guess what they would find? This guy was making bombs. This guy had illegal weapons. This guy was stealing drugs. And this is kind of how the FBI sort of dismantled these groups. And they were allowed to say some pretty radical stuff. But if you have strong security, you can still curb the danger from these groups. Because if somebody is associated with the Panthers or these weirdo KKK groups or something like that, you can bet they're doing something illegal. And even with Timothy McVeigh, I mean, McVeigh, when he was in these conspiracy activist circles, I mean, he started to do criminal stuff. I mean, he was doing a bit of this. He was scamming, credit card companies. He was doing all kinds of stuff, getting himself into trouble. And then he started to make explosives or steal explosives. And now this is kind of an American way of dealing with this, different from the way it's in Germany, because in Germany, our security services are almost comically tiny. They're very tiny, and the police force is very tiny. And guess what? We actually separate the police from the interior intelligence, meaning it's not like the FBI here. You know, the FBI is they do counterintelligence and they have police powers, but here the spooks, they cannot arrest anybody. So it's a very weak
Yeah.
security here, but they increase the toughness of the laws. If you say stuff, if you go on the Alex Jones show like Kanye West and say I like Hitler, that's a crime in Germany. So that's kind of a weird way, a strange way we're doing this. We have a weak security force, very weak security, but we have these tough laws on speech.
Yeah, and that's the opposite of what it should be. You know, America used to have a very robust internal security system. Most big cities had intelligence, red squads. They would infiltrate the local Black Panthers. They would, like I had a friend of mine, he was in the FBI. He said the Northern California Communist Party in the 60s had 5 leaders. 3 of them were FBI informants. You know, they had them under control, and they brought down the Klan, they brought down the Black Panthers, and they didn't destroy America's freedom of speech rights. But if you're talking about using in the United States, most countries have libel laws. America does too, but they have a public figure classification. If you're classified as a public figure, you can say anything about you. It's virtually impossible for anybody classified as a public figure, which would probably be me and Jeff. You know, somebody could say we were both child molesters, and there's probably not much we could do about it because we're public figures. But we saw what happened to J. Edgar Hoover, the massive character campaign against him. We saw what happened.
The cross-dressing fake claims,
all this total garbage. McCarthy, etc. If you're an anti-communist, you'll be subject to this kind of thing. But I just want to draw on a point that Jean is making. I think, and I've noticed this, there's a very big difference between American conservatives and European conservatives regarding the Republican Party. Americans, we want to save our country. Primarily, we regard the Democrats as communists. We think that if they get in again, they're going to legalize 30 million illegal immigrants, and there will never be another conservative government, and they will start coming after us. I believe anyway, we're on the verge of a communist revolution. So the first step is saving America. So we look at people like J.D. Vance. He is an ideal candidate for winning the election, in that he's got the good history, he's got the youth, all that kind of thing. He is absolutely appalling on foreign policy, 100%. And I can absolutely see why I'm concerned about that. I can absolutely see why Europeans are concerned about that. Ukrainians must be tearing their hair out about that. But most Americans are just focused on saving the country right now.